Welcome to our lunchtime seminar at DERC. My name is Haiqing Yu. I'm a Vice Chancellor's Principal Research Fellow, a new person, located in DERC in the School of Media and Communication. Before I introduce our speaker, Titus, I'm going to just do the acknowledgement of country. MIT University acknowledges the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which the university stands. MIT University respectfully recognizes elders both past and the present. Okay, Titus Chen, my visitor at DERC, is Associate Professor in the Institute of Political Science, the National Sun Yat-sen University based in Taiwan. He specializes in Chinese politics, Chinese foreign policy, East Asian international relations, and digital discourse analysis. He is currently doing two projects. One examines the Chinese government's thought engineering campaigns through information and communication technologies, and the other examines China's authoritarian human rights discourses. So today's talk is from the first project he's been doing for some time. So welcome, Titus.
Well, thank you, Haiqing, for introduction and inviting me to give a talk here. I really feel honored that today I share with you some of my preliminary findings from an empirical research on Chinese-Australian media practices and the media politics, if you will. And this research project is carried out by me and Mike Jensen of University of Canberra. I don't claim myself as a specialist on Chinese-Australian media or Australian politics. I specialize in Chinese politics, especially some heavy stuff called thought control or thought engineering, including censorship and propaganda policy as carried out by the Chinese government. So these empirical findings about Chinese-Australian media practices here is kind of a pet project that I brainstormed with Mike Jensen last year. So I try not to be too heavy, and this is a lunch talk, so yeah, it should be more casual than usual formal address. Chinese language media in the Australian cyberspace, and we call it diaspora media, as a form of thought engineering. And I have to admit that after a few days here at Melbourne, and this is my first time in Australia, and of course in Melbourne, after just a few more days of being fully immersed here on the street, I realized that some sectors of my paper has to be rewritten and revised. A lot of close-range ethnographic observations led me to this conclusion that I need to rewrite some part of my paper. Now, a bit introduction, the state of research on China's digital politics, that's what I came from, my background. We'll be talking about political and regulatory environment of China's digital politics. And then the main section of this presentation is case studies. I compare WeChat content and SBS. Just yesterday, I walked past the SBS building and I realized, wow, this is something that I study. How exciting. But, this is a family tour, so I don't have the luxury to go into and talk to people there. Hopefully one day I'll get that chance, and followed by concluding remarks. Now, what we have learned about digital politics in China, by that I refer to the internet in China mainly. The internet is a virtual space where state-society relationship unfold has been a hot-button issue in Chinese politics. When the internet was introduced to China in the mid-1990s, for about a decade, the internet had been held as a liberation technology, where state, government simply did not know how to deal with it, and the social actors, NGOs, even democracy activists were charging, trying to take advantage of this technology to make their voice heard, to carry forward their agenda. So for about a decade, the internet in China was understood as something that can empower autonomous social forces or encourage social diversification, liberalization, something that can facilitate political changes even toward democratization, and something that can enhance the quality of public administration. Work done by scholars such as Yang Guobin, Xiao Chang, Diamond, and Chen Gang, Bandersky, they all came up with such a relatively optimistic assessment that, yes, the internet can change China toward maybe a liberal direction. Before long, people realized that we shall not give such a rosy assessment of the internet development in China because the government is quickly adapting to the challenges, especially liberal challenges, presented by the internet and netizens. So soon, pretty quickly, the internet was redefined as a repression technology. And by that, scholars such as Kane at Harvard and Molly Roberts, Jennifer Penn, they emphasized the censorship policy that the Chinese government has imposed, and it's got stricter and stricter over time. So keyword or theme-based search limits and denials and the Great Firewall, we're all familiar with situations like that. It's not just a repression technology. The internet can also be a manipulation technology. By saying that, we mainly refer to the practices or strategies of diversion and distraction, disengagement, that when you pose something critical of the Chinese government on the internet, in the cyberspace, the pro-regime netizens do not engage in serious debate with you. Instead, they pose mechanical, robotic content to distract cyber discussion away from your critical report or your criticisms concerning the government performance. And the government has also condoned identity-based, the nationalist or patriotic, border and xenophobic content by either voluntary pro-regime netizens or those who are paid by the government. And the internet right now is not just manipulation, it's not just repression, it's also a technology of indoctrination and persuasion for regime legitimation. The Chinese state, is a proactive and a dominant internet content provider. They have engaged in digital propaganda for over a decade. Beyond reactive censorship and manipulation, Beijing has actively molded online public opinion. Digital propaganda reflects the regime's perception of political priorities and insecurities. By studying digital propaganda as practiced by the Chinese government, we understood the regime's mindscape. And digital propaganda, unlike the traditional, conventional propaganda styles, it cuts through bureaucracy, the bureaucratic tiers. It promises point-to-point delivery from the top leaders to average citizens on street. And it promises also a high degree of social penetration. So the Chinese leadership has emphasized very much digital propaganda throughout the past few years. Now, the political and the regulatory environment, when we talk about the party organ that supervises and gives political directions, we're talking about Communist Party's Central Cyberspace Affairs Commission. In the past, it was the leading group. But since last November, after the 19th Party Congress, this leading group has been institutionalized and formalized and upgraded to the commission level. And we believe that Xi Jinping, as Secretary General of CPC, still chairs this commission. under this commission, we have a Central Propaganda Department and a Cyberspace Administration of China and a United Front Work Department that hold jurisdictions on the matter of digital propaganda, especially Bureau Number 3, Bureau Number 6, and Bureau Number 9 of United Front Work Department is especially related to Chinese-Australian diaspora media practices here. These are some legislations or administrative directives concerning Internet news, content, information. Now, the impact of these political, policy, and regulatory elements on the Internet market is number one is a real name registration. And it allows the police in China to track you down a lot more efficiently than before. And news, especially news of current affairs, political news, economic news, social incidents news, they are as a prerogative of state media. Without prior approval from the government, you may not, and you are not entitled to post news like that on any platform online, Weibo or WeChat. And we're also having enhanced online content censorship, effective integration of conventional state media and online market, and the prevalence of soft content, not non-public, non-political. It's more entertaining, more recreational, lifestyle topics populated the Chinese internet. And the last but not the least, probably the most relevant here is extraterritorial effect of domestic cyber policies. Legislations, administrative directives given by the Chinese government to regulate and control its domestic internet. Its effect reaches far beyond Chinese borders. Okay, so let's talk about WeChat. In China, we're talking about an heavily informationized and mobile society. By last year, we have 752 million internet users in China out of 1.3 billion population total. And the WeChat, by March this year, WeChat, the Tencent, the company that runs WeChat, claims that it has collected 1 billion user accounts. But that is not reliable stats because each one of us can have multiple user accounts. So when it comes to statistics, we use DAUs or MAUs, daily active users and monthly active users. By September last year, WeChat has 728 million daily active users. By DAUs, we mean that you switch on WeChat at least once a day for 5 minutes. And WeChat is the stickiest social media. Average daily use time is 82 minutes as compared to Facebook's 50 minutes. Why? Because, of course, I think I don't need to explain that. WeChat is what we call the all-inclusive or super social app. It's more than just an instant messaging or group chatting app. It enables you to do just about everything. If you live in China, book a taxi, make a reservation at a restaurant, pay utility fees, pay school fees. You can do all kinds of that on WeChat, through WeChat. So it's an e-business and e-governance platform. Now, there is a public dimension, the public domain of WeChat that is called official accounts, 微信公众号, where private citizens and the state media and entities, companies can upload their information. But only state media is allowed by the law and by the legislation to put up, upload news, especially public information news. When we look at the top-ranked, top 10 WeChat OAs, we realize that half of them are run by state media, state and party media. What about the other half? The other half are most likely patriotic media outlets. So it's split. by state media and patriotic media. Okay. Currently, there are 3.5, I believe it's now more than that, 3.5 million WeChat OAs with 797 million monthly active users following news and all kinds of information online through WeChat official accounts. So it is a powerful platform on which people retrieve information, all kinds of information, private information, public information, and the news. That's why we choose WeChat over Weibo. It is now a dominant, even monopolistic Chinese online platform. So for these empirical studies, we choose top 3 Chinese Australian WeChat OAs in terms of their subscription. The first one is ABC Media, 华人看世界, and the second one is WeSydney. Now this one is rather interesting because it is run by a company, a media company registered here in Australia, but apparently has a close connection to the Chinese government's Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. And the third OA is 今日悉尼, Sydney Today. In order to compare WeChat content, Mike Jensen and I chose Special Broadcasting Service, a Chinese content, as a contrast group. And the time period is from July 2015 to November 2017. We did all the content analysis from batch download to visualization in R. And this is the result of pre-processing tasks. So we have collected about 16,000 articles. We do structural topic modeling on these articles, and we identify 50 topics from these 16,000 articles, and we further group them into 4 topic themes. There are 13 topics related to business activities, 8 topics that's purely entertainment, for fun. 18 topics is about lifestyle, how you live a life here in Australia, and then 11 topics that touch upon public interest or political topics. If you took a look at this table, the bottom row is public interest topics, and for SBS dedicate nearly 60% of its content to public interest topics. WeChat, these 3 WeChat OAs, totally dedicate about 20%. So you begin to see the contrast. And there are some topics, it's hard to see now, I'll explain later. You will see that some groups, some topics are heavily addressed by SBS, and some topics are heavily addressed by WeChat. Now let's talk about prevalent topics of WeChat. The top 5 topics that is heavily addressed by WeChat OAs are entertainment, business, lifestyle topic, and there is one public administration issue, and that is terrorism and mass shooting. What about SBS? The top 5 topics addressed by SBS are primarily about public administration and public concerns. The first topic has about 20% of content of SBS, and it talks about Han Sen, the Nationalist Party, Shorten, same-sex, Turnbull, Liberal Party, voters, the senators, and political parties. So it tells you that this topic is about Australian politics. Public interest topic. This is topic number 25, Australian politics and Australian Parliament. The pink line, the trend line, is SBS, and the green line at the bottom is WeChat. It tells you that WeChat has avoided Australian politics and the parliament topics. And SBS talks a lot about Australian politics. The other public interest topic is Australian public finance and the social policy, how you pay tax, whether or not you are entitled to social benefits. Again, SBS talks a lot heavily about this topic, whereas WeChat addressed nearly none of that. But keep in mind, this is WeChat OAs that is run and administered, advertised by Chinese Australian communities here. This is not some OAs in remote, faraway village in China. The third public interest topic is terror attacks, criminal offenses. Now, this time, for this topic, WeChat talks a bit, but still it's no comparison to SBS. Now, this is the most interesting contrast regarding this topic, which is about Chinese politics and the Chinese foreign relations. This is WeChat that we're talking about. Supposedly, our audience and the viewers of WeChat OAs are supposed to be very interested in their home country's political development or Beijing's foreign relations, but still, a flat line at the bottom. WeChat has avoided addressing Chinese politics or Chinese foreign relations topics. And SBS, over time, has dedicated more content to Chinese politics and Chinese foreign relations, especially after November 2017. That's the 19th Party Congress in China. And we did a little regression studies, and it is statistically found significant that for all the public interest topics, SBS has dedicated more content than WeChat. So what exactly has WeChat done? What has it presented to its viewers? It's entertainment topic, celebrity gossips and the laughs and the jokes and the fun. You see the green line now jumps to the top. WeChat talks a lot about jokes and fun and the celebrity gossips. And SBS kind of avoided that. Australian real estate market, where to purchase a house, some practical stuff, right? It's not surprising, but it is surprising to find that WeChat has dedicated such a high percentage of its content to tell its viewers where to buy a house in Australia. And SBS doesn't talk about that. Again, it is statistically significant that SBS dedicated more content to non-public interest topics. When they talk about the same topic, they use different news reporting style. So for topic number 16, the Chinese WeChat use China, 中国, as the most frequently appeared term, whereas Australia, SBS use 美国, the United States, North Korea, as the frequent terms. Now, some interesting case of Hongshan Huang, this business tycoon in Australia. I know nothing about this person until late last year, and we did a little content search and realized that Mr. Huang, during the time period leading up to the general election in 2016 here, he penned 7 quite partisan essays on Sydney Today on this WeChat OA. It's called 项目看大选, so Mr. Huang's observation on the general election. And he's well connected to, all major political parties here in Australia. In these 7 partisan essays, he painted a rather pro-labor tone. And he said liberals were losing, and the prime minister was ambitious, but he's incompetent, and he has no vision for Australia, and he endorsed the Labour because the Labour nominated 4 Chinese candidates for the parliament. And he was quite critical of Australian democracy because he said politicians here, they pursue short-term parochial interest over national interest. And he warned Canberra, Australian politicians, to stay away from siding with the US or the Philippines on the matter of South China Sea issues. So I'm supposed to stop here. Some concluding remarks. Are we talking about Beijing's soft power or sharp power? Where Joseph Nye and his associates have been talking about throughout the past year. How do we distinguish soft power and sharp power? But certainly, soft power or sharp power of Beijing have gone beyond Chinese borders. And we feel that here in Australia. Domestic control, domestic legislations have extraterritorial effects. Whatever is not allowed to be said in China remains not to be allowed to be said here in Australia. I have an international relations background, so when we talk about that, we were thinking about a race-based conception of state sovereignty, which is not Westphalian, which is very new and old at the same time. You want to stay controlled by the Chinese government, you stay controlled by staying online. So this traditional understanding of immigration studies, a socialization through migration, it may not work because living here does not mean you have to be detached from Chinese connections. All sorts of connections may be maintained through online platforms such as WeChat. So it presents a dilemma to a free society. When we address this issue to US, to American scholars, even officials, their question is, can we just ban WeChat? Yes, you can. Just push a few buttons. Yes, you can, but by doing that, you join the authoritarians club. So you ban WeChat, Beijing wins, because you're just one of them. You leave WeChat alone, then what about this content manipulation or content diversion? So you leave it alone, Beijing still wins, because that's the cyberspace where Beijing controls. So what about engaging Chinese community through WeChat? I want to show you some website. This is what I found this morning. An Australian politician tried to stay in touch with his Chinese constituents by switching to WeChat live, talking, having conversation, real-time conversation with his Chinese constituents. Is that a future trend that we adopt? Local politicians, do they switch to WeChat to stay in touch with Chinese constituents? But then how do you divert? How do you deal with the content manipulation or censorship? Because whatever that is aired or broadcast on WeChat has to go through the Chinese regulatory environment. Maybe I should stop here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's time for Q&A. Make sure can you press the button C on the table if you want to ask a question, or I can pass on the microphone to you. Well, Titus, you still need to come here to continue the Q&A session.
Sure.
Hi. I found that really interesting, and I'm Chris Seguras from School of Global Urban Social Studies. But I'm interested particularly in young people and international students from China who study outside the country, and the extent to which their online world is still Chinese state-controlled media, like WeChat, and the extent to which Chinese young people and students are using social media outside that Chinese constellation, so particularly Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, so on, and whether they're opting out and engaging in that media as well, and how the Chinese authorities engage with those platforms to connect with that community or to monitor that community.
So do I address the question or do I collect a few? Oh, okay. So your question is, does the Chinese government use other platforms as well?
Yeah, and do Chinese young people outside China use those other platforms?
I believe they do. I believe they use Facebook, Twitter as well. But to stay connected with families and friends in China, and to stay in this commercial transaction network in which China is the center, then they have to stay with WeChat. And Facebook, I don't think it involves much commercial transaction, same with Twitter. So for Chinese, especially for new immigrants, when they came here and settle for a few months only, they still have, it takes even a few years for them to break through the linguistic and the cultural barriers. It's quite a task for them. I had 10 years in North America, so I can testify how difficult and challenging that could be. Now, back at my time in late 1990s, there was nothing called WeChat, so I had to really try very hard to break through linguistic and cultural barriers. But now they have WeChat to stay in touch with China, friends and family in China, also their compatriots, their friends, Chinese friends here. I wouldn't say that's a bubble, but that's how they get connected and to find identity group, their own group, where they find comfort and console. So I would say they stay with WeChat for a number of reasons, even though at the same time I believe now there's no restraint. They can, of course, hop onto different social media platforms.
Can I add something on this? Because I'm conducting an ARC Discovery Grant, which was awarded in the last year, with my colleague Wan Ying-sun from UTS to look at Chinese language digital social media in Australia, rethinking the concept of soft power and citizenship. And we are conducting a large-scale survey. Stay tuned. I will be able to report the result by the end of this year on the preliminary findings based on the survey to understand how Chinese migrants and diasporas living in Australia, whether it's permanent residents or not, use social media, including WeChat, Facebook, etc.
Yes.
Sorry, can you hear me now? I was just wondering, with the OA stuff, does that function in a similar manner to, say, the Twitter blue tick? And if so, sorry, the official account stuff, if you have an official account, does that mean that you're outside of the kind of review processes, or is that triggering different review processes? What I'm trying to get to is what kind of governance processes are taking place if you are an official account?
Pricing.
Sorry.
I think I understand your question. The thing is, I think because for people who are not familiar with the ecosystem of WeChat, so you want to know when you get into the official account, is it what kind of system or environment it is? So basically, is it still within the WeChat, or is it outside the WeChat into a different platform? Is that what you are concerned about?
No, more so. So the last example with was a Chris Bowen about him wanting to connect with constituents, but the kind of roadblock that might be in place. Would that roadblock be him getting an official account, or would that be after he gets an official account? He then what kind of things might be in place to then check any content he posts?
I believe WeChat Live is not WeChat OA. It's something else. but it remains within the infrastructure of WeChat. So I believe these politicians' real-time conversation with these Chinese constituents are being monitored by the Chinese government, because all the traffic within WeChat go through China and come back down here. And because of the high-speed internet, we don't feel the time lag. But that's how it is designed. It has to go through China and come back down here.
I actually followed the live chat. It's through the Labour's WeChat public account. Shorten and his cabinets post stuff on their public account in Chinese regularly. And they also sometimes hold this kind of live, so-called live conversation. It's not two-way. It's basically one way. Yeah, they talk to you, and you can ask questions, type in questions.
That's one way. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Titus, for your presentation. So my name is Terry from the city of Melbourne. So I'm kind of the part of the project. So for the city of Melbourne WeChat account. So we launched the WeChat account last year. So as a communication channel to engage the Chinese audience in Melbourne. So thank you for your observation and investigation, the statistics about that. So I'm not sure, just my personal opinion is I'm not sure how much that's to do with the government, the Chinese government soft power, because the nature of the three OA, the official account is selected from the Australian. I think that they're commercial accounts. So what they're trying to do is to get as much subscriber, as much clicks for the articles as possible, I think, as they can. So in order to sell the advertisements, and also you mentioned about the real estate, a lot of the real estate content. I think that's because part of the reason might be because a lot of the contents are editorials, advertorials. They run with the real estate agents because they received money from that's the paid advertorials. I'm just wondering. I'm not fully convinced about the observation and the conclusion, like the link in between. Just wondering whether you have investigation in whether these OAs in Australia they actually receive subsidies or sponsorship from the Chinese government or whatever the bodies associated with the Chinese government, because that might be a indication of the collections, maybe.
That is a great question. And indeed, Mike and I, when we draw our conclusion, we have a difficulty defining this phenomenon as Chinese soft power or sharp power, because by sharp power, it means the involvement, a deliberate involvement of the government, putting its own political agenda into the social media or social media platforms. For the two WeChat OAs, we could not confirm that. There is one about Nanhai Group. That WeChat OA is, we believe, directly run and sponsored by the Chinese government. Then, of course, you don't see its official face. It's always behind somewhere. For real estate market, I think that's for practical stuff. Immigrants do need to purchase property and housing, so I think that's practical and legitimate. So, at the end of the day, our conclusion is we cannot know for sure how much and whether the Chinese government is directly involved in the content and the provision of content. But there is one thing that we can be sure, and that is all the postings, all the content must obey the Chinese legislations. That's why even until now, these OAs are still there. And Chinese legislation directives and the policy guidelines tell you that political news, social news, economic news are off limit. So what can you do? This is an institutional environment that leads you, prompt you, urge you to upload commercial news or housing or jokes and fun, those safe topics that the government might just turn away from. Then they don't block you. And that's the key to any commercial media outlets, right? That your traffic is not blocked, your account remains there. So this is a legislative or institutional result in a quite restrictive environment. Otherwise, how we cannot explain how come Chinese viewers here are not interested in Chinese politics or Chinese foreign relations. That simply doesn't make sense to us. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, hi. I'm very sorry I missed the start, but I'm pleased to see it's being recorded so I can go back and watch it. And you may have covered this, apologies if so, but how does this fit into the broader Chinese diasporic media in Australia? I have a lot of involvement in community radio here, and I know that there are radio services which are effectively Chinese government services that are broadcast probably through narrowcasting radio licenses. And in response to that, some community radio stations have Chinese programs which are deliberately anti-Chinese government. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the people who are using WeChat, it'd be good to know what other media sources they're using, whether they still continue to follow through the Australian media, do they look for alternative sources which are not WeChat? Yeah.
I don't think I'm knowledgeable to answer questions like that.
That's all right.
Maybe Hai-Chin is a lot more qualified on that question.
Question, fantastic question to look at the digital Chinese language digital social media in connection with the so-called traditional and the community media. Yes, I'm pleased to know that you have been working with community media, including the Chinese language media, like in Melbourne, like 3CW, which has been heavily backed up by the Chinese government. So in relation to the question that you have asked, it's important to do the institutional analysis on one hand, which is very difficult and sensitive, but we are going to do it. Wan Ying and I are going to do it. And on the other hand, to see how the online social media, digital media, or the websites have been featured in the digital diaspora's lives, Chinese digital diaspora's lives in Australia. What other kinds of news sources they have access to apart from WeChat? Because we know when we look at Chinese, there's a diversified community, not just people coming from mainland China are called Chinese. Titus will be recognized as Chinese, even though he would say, I'm Taiwanese.
I have no problem with that.
And people from Singapore may have different kind of political agenda as well. And what kind of media that they use, apart from WeChat? Because I know most people still use WeChat to connect with their business partners or family members in China. But still, they use many other kinds of media and they're exposed to the news sources, diversified sources of news. And again, stay tuned because Wan Ying and I will be able to report a lot more very exciting results on our research from next year onward. And, I think the research is topical, and we have a, quite broad range of topics to look at, not just the content analysis that Titus and Mike Jensen have done. And we look at content analysis, we look at institutional analysis, we also look at the journalistic practices. So who are those people? Not just who owns those public official accounts, but who are the ones, who are the gatekeepers? And who are the consumers? And when we come to consumers, we have so different layers, even among the Chinese PRC diasporas in Australia. What kind of Chinese you're talking about? Professionals like me or the laborers?
Yeah.
The everyday mom and dad, the stay-at-home moms who don't even speak English. So we need to look at what kind of profession they are, gender, educational, home background, etc., to have a big, better idea of how the Chinese use digital language, social media in Australia. Apart from how the political parties try to use social media to engage with Chinese voters.
Yeah. And adding on that is my idea that for any government or any public entity, we should pursue our viewers, our voters, our constituencies, our stakeholders we should adopt whatever media outlets they use. So it could be Facebook, Twitter, or in Taiwan it's Line or WhatsApp. And then if Chinese communities here and worldwide, they stick with WeChat, then why don't Australian politicians and even Australian Chamber of Commerce, Australian libraries, they open WeChat accounts as well, reach out to their users, their constituencies, and open the accounts first and upload their public information first, and then worry about censorship or content manipulation later. Just a few months ago, the U.S. Embassy in China they had their WeChat account, and they uploaded a quite political announcement. And even until today, the Chinese government does not take it down. That is about, I think it's a spokesperson of State Department saying that censorship policy is practiced by the Chinese government is not going to be honored by the U.S. government. So that's Orwellian nonsense. Is not going to be honored by the U.S. government. And a few days ago, I checked that U.S. Embassy WeChat OA. It is still up there, and it's been read by over 100,000 times. Maybe Australian government, public entities should do the same.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Connie, originally from Hong Kong, settled here 24 years ago. I'm very interested in your view, what will happen to Taiwan, because China has been giving pressure of other countries not to recognize Taiwan. So what do you think? Will Taiwan sooner or later be like Hong Kong and Macau? Counted as China, part of China?
I think that question deserves maybe a whole day workshop, maybe a semester-long discussion. But briefly, yes, we have been under the duress of Chinese pressure recently, ever since 2016, when the new government came to the presidential office. And the latest round of Chinese pressure is to force airliners to change the destination name, Taiwan, from Taiwan to China, Taiwan. Adding China maybe is insignificant to people outside of China or outside of Taiwan, but for people in Taiwan, that's super sensitive. That means if you add China before Taiwan, that means Taiwan is effectively under the Chinese or PRC control. So that's the latest move of Chinese pressure. And Qantas bowed down to Chinese pressure along with a host of other airliners. Now, the U.S. government is working to convince U.S. airliners not to follow suit. That's one thing. And the other thing is diplomatic relations. Since Tsai Ing-wen, the more of a pro-independence government, took power in Taiwan, Beijing has taken away 3 countries from Taiwan, meaning they switched diplomatic relations recognition from Taipei to Beijing. That is diplomatic relations. But for non-official diplomatic relations with Southeast Asia, with Australia, with the United States and European countries, we have doing a lot to improve these practical relations, simply not bearing the official name. I shall stop here.
Yes. On that note, we think I will stop here, and thank you all for coming to the lunchtime talk, and thank you, Titus, for all coming all the way from Taiwan to talk about WeChat, SBS, and the Chinese diaspora in Australia.
Thank you. Thank you all.